Hi students, welcome to the BYJU'S Hindu News Analysis for 10th of September 2018. So let's get started. So let's look into the first article. So the first article says Tamil Nadu recommends release of all 7 Rajiv case convicts. So with respect to this particular issue, we had already had a discussion on 21st August where we did discuss how exactly is the procedure that has to be maintained and sustained with respect to the constitution, what are the powers of the president, what are the powers of the governor, and what was the background with reference to this Rajiv Gandhi assassination case. So all that has already been discussed, and recently we also saw that Supreme Court came up with one of the reviews and it said that the governor can actually look into this particular call. So what we will be discussing is a very restricted part, but we will have a close tab of whatever is happening with respect to this case study, and we will have the relevant discussion according to the latest moves. So what we will be discussing in this particular case is that there was one of the meeting of the cabinet which was chaired by Chief Minister Edapadi K. Palaniswamy, and he said that he is recommending to the governor Banwarilal Purohit that all 7 life convicts in the former Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi assassination case be released under Article 161 of the Constitution. So what does Article 161 of the Indian Constitution says? So it is giving the powers to the governor basically to grant certain pardons or to suspend or to remit or commute sentences in certain cases. So the governor of this particular state, that is governor in this case is Banwarilal Purohit, will have certain powers to grant pardons, reprieves, reprised as well as remission, and remit all these suspensions that have been given as per the executive power that has been accorded to him under the constitution. So what we will have to discuss is what is the way that the governor would be able to take this on. So what are the discretionary powers that he has? Does he have to accept the particular cabinet move is what we need to consider in this particular act. So what we will have to look at is what are the various steps that the governor would be able to take with respect to this move that has been taken up by the cabinet. So the first one says advice of the Council of Ministers is binding on the governor, so he may accept it immediately. So the first thing is, in case the governor feels whatever the cabinet has said, he has to listen to it, so he immediately may give his assent to it, so he may sign this particular move, and then what will happen is the conviction will be released and these people will be pardoned off. So that's the first move. So what is the first move? The first move is basically the cabinet which has moved this particular bill will be accepted and the governor will give his assent, and then post assent these people will be pardoned off. And the next thing is no time limit is prescribed in the constitution and the governor can take his time. So does the governor have to give it within a particular duration? No. Why? Because the constitution does not make any time with reference to which the governor has to sign this particular bill. So what it goes on to say is the governor is under no restriction, so he might take any period of time, let it be 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, 5 months, whatsoever it is. So he is not bound to sign, that is in times of the time. So there is no particular time that he has to sign with, so he may take a lot of time and keep this particular bill at a particular time lag. And what it further goes on to say is the governor can seek center's opinion in this particular matter. So what the governor has is the discretionary power, and this discretionary power he may give it to the president, and the president is indirectly supported by the cabinet. So he may ask the center's will or center's opinion, should I be going with this particular move or should I be stopping it? So the governor can ask the president and he can take a relevant opinion of the center as well, and the governor can seek consideration of the decision. So he can give it back to the cabinet and also ask the cabinet to reconsider its decision. Is it a good move? Is it a bad move? In case he feels it's a bad move, so he may ask the cabinet to reconsider this particular decision. But in case the cabinet still forwards the same thing to the governor, he is bound by it. So this is the constitutional mandate with respect to how the governor would function. But this is quite an ambiguous situation. All the background has already been discussed, but in case there is anything that happens in the future, we will have the continuation of this particular news analysis. Why? Because for now the background is already discussed and this is all all we will have to understand structurally. But moving ahead, any decision that would be taken with respect to this case will be discussed once again. So moving on, let's look into the next article. So the next article says 2 irrigation facilities in Telangana get heritage tag. So what is the most important thing? Let's look into the context. So it says a meeting in the International Executive Council, the highest decision making body of the International Commission on Irrigation and Drainage. So the first important point that we will be discussing is what is this international or Commission on Irrigation and Drainage. So in this particular move, what we will have to understand is what is this organization also whole, what are its functions, how is that this particular organization provides this heritage tag is what we need to understand. So the most important point that we need to understand is that this International Commission on Irrigation and Drainage was established in the year 1950. So why was it established in the year 1950? So basically what this organization goes about doing is it has certain experts, and these experts work in the areas of irrigation. They are also from the field of drainage, that is how the water disposal has to be controlled, and also from the field of flood management. So this is one of those organizations which will have all these experts and individuals who have expertise in the areas of irrigation, drainage as well as flood management. And this is one of those organizations which is an NGO, that is it is a not-for-profit organization. So what is the objective of this? So when we look into the objective or the basic mission of this particular organization, what it wants to make sure is it wants to make sure that there is sustainable agriculture with respect to the water management. So we know that water is a very important ingredient for all human beings as well as to the animal kingdom, but this animal kingdom is facing a lot of water crunch. So what this organization as a whole believes is how is that we would be able to continue the sustainable agriculture by controlling the water or managing water. So that is the basic objective of this, and what it wants to make sure is that it wants to make sure by controlling this mechanism and freeing this mechanism, what it wants to do is it wants to make sure that the world is free of poverty as well as it wants to meet the hunger throughout the world. So that is the objective of this particular organization. So what it basically goes on to do is, so it has its organizational values, and this organizational values goes about giving certain important tags. And what are these tags that we are speaking about? That is with respect to the heritage irrigation structure. So this organization as a whole actually gives one of the tag, and that is called as the heritage irrigation structure. So the second important point that we need to understand from this article is what is this heritage irrigation structure? So this is one of the important recognitions that this organization provides to historical irrigation structure. So what do I mean by it? Let's say for example there is one of the civilizational institute, or this civilization has actually brought about one of the irrigation projects. So if this irrigation project has been more than 100 years, so that is one of the important criterion that we will have to consider. So there is one of the civilizational irrigational project whose time zone is beyond 100 years. What this organization will consider is it will give this recognition to that particular structure. So what is the objective of to why this heritage tag is given? It is because they will consider what is the civilizational irrigational structure, and this is similar on the lines of the World Heritage tag. So we know for the fact that the UNESCO actually gives the World Heritage tag. So on a similar lines, what this International Commission on Irrigation and Drainage provides is the heritage irrigation structure, which is on a similar lines as to how the UNESCO is awarding the World Heritage tag. So what we need to understand is why is this organization giving this? So the third important question that pops up is why is that this organization wants to do it? One of the important things is it wants to see the history as well as understand how the evolution of the irrigation happened. It is not that we are there in the modern era, but there are also civilizational values. So there have been number of accomplishments in the past, and these accomplishments can be studied, and if we are able to trace how irrigation was there in the back structure, in the back civilization, we would be able to adapt the same thing. So one of the basic things that we will be able to do is we would be able to understand how the irrigation was there back then, so that in case we are able to adapt the same policy into the current times. So the basic objective of this particular program is to study the irrigation pattern from the civilizational perspective. So once we understand the civilizational perspective, so that we would be able to adapt into the modern terms. And then meanwhile, what we also do is preserve all these important organizations, that is the organizations which are currently looking after this particular irrigational plot. So what is the criteria? One of the criteria is 100 years old, and it also considers all the dams that are there, and it considers the canals and also the tank system that is there within this particular region. So these are the important things that we need to consider. But what are the benefits? Why is that this particular organization is giving this particular stand? Why is that all the states should actually take it up seriously? One of the most important thing is we will be learning a lot. So it becomes a very important learning curve. If it has matter in it, if it has content in it, if it has something productive in it, why not accept it? Why not implement it? So what we would be able to understand is the factors of the heritage structure, which is sustainable, which is progressed with time, and then what we will be doing is learning lessons from all these structures, so that we are enforcing the same in the modern structure. So the next important point that we would be able to do is we would be able to teach the students as well as professionals. So these are also the ways in which a particular project can be implemented. So apart from the learning curve, we would be able to teach the professionals, we would be able to teach the students, we would be also able to teach the general public about the civilizational values. And the third important thing that we also need to consider is all these structures which are there in number of countries do not get the funding. So the minute it is given a particular tag, what will happen is government will also start looking into this perspective. So this particular funding lacuna that this particular project would have, the government will start seriously looking into it, and it will sustain this irrigational project continuously, because there is dearth of funding that this project has got. So in order to make sure this dearth of financial problem is not met, what this project will also do is it will provide the funding, so that the future generation can also reap the benefits of this particular program. So these are some of the things that we need to understand with respect to this organization. But why are we discussing this? That is because two important irrigation facilities, one is Sadarmatt anicut, which is across river Godavari. So this becomes a very important and a potential question for the prelims. So where is this Sadarmatt anicut? It is across Godavari in Nirmal district, and also one of the other things, that is Pedda Cheruvu, which is in Kamareddy district, has been chosen for this heritage tag. So let's try and understand some of the important facts with respect to these two bodies. So what this says is that Sadarmatt anicut 2 is a deserving recognition to Sadarmatt anicut, which has provided precious water for paddy crops in its design anicut. So this is one of the important things which was built by Nawab Ildul Dawla, who bore the title of Visar ul Umra Bahadur in 1891 to 1902. So what is the important facts that we are considering here? Who has it built it? It is Nawab Il-ud Dawla, and as we already discussed, one of the important criteria is 100 years. So this has met the criteria according to it. So this was also considered. So this is one of the important points from the prelims perspective. And the next that it goes on to speak is about Pedda Cheruvu. Pedda Cheruvu means big tank in Telugu, and this is located on the outskirts of this district headquarters town in separate over an area of 618 acres, and this was built by Mir Mehboob Ali Khan, the 6th Nizam of Hyderabad state. So kindly remember who built this. This can be a likely question in the prelims examination, and this can also be asked in all prelims examination across different exams. So what are the important things that we need need to understand. So these two important irrigational projects have time and again provided important mechanisms, and that it has provided water for the irrigation facilities, it has provided water for the drinking facilities, and it has also made sure that people are sustaining this particular program. And one of the other important points from the prelims perspective is that this tank was taken up under the second round of Mission Kakatiya. So this Mission Kakatiya is an important program that the Telangana government has actually taken up to make sure that all the tanks and the irrigational facilities are provided and drinking water facilities is provided to the people of Telangana. So this is what we need to understand from this article. So moving on, let's look into the next article. So the next article says endangered Pondicherry shark spotted near Kakinada. So when we look into the context, it says field biologists from the East Godavari River and Estuary Ecosystem Foundation have sparked Pondicherry shark and endangered species protected under the provisions of the Wildlife Protection Act. So what we need to consider is certain important facts with respect to the prelims examination. So let's look into it. What is the IUCN status? So the IUCN status for it is critically endangered. So this Pondicherry shark is also has another name which is called as the long-nosed shark, and this occurs in the countries like, say for example, it is there in China, so it was seen in India, so it was seen in Pakistan, it was seen in countries of Oman earlier, and also what we see is in Indonesia as well as in Malaysia. So these are the important countries that we would have seen this particular shark. So these are the countries which is currently seen. Apart from this, we also need to know another important fact, and this is also known as Palasora in the local parlance of the Pondicherry shark. So this is all the important factual data that we will have to know with respect to this particular Pondicherry shark. And apart from this, what we also need to know is that it is also being given the Wildlife Protection Act, that is it is has the same amount of security like that of the tiger, that is it is placed in the schedule 1 of the protection. That is the important point from the prelims examination. So this is all we will have to know with respect to this article. So moving on, let's look into the next article. So the next article says bail over jail. So what is this article all about? So this is one of the most important articles with respect to the police reforms. So kindly pay heed to all the important sections and all the important dimensions of this particular article. So when we look into what can be the possible analysis, first thing we need to understand is what is the possible introduction, for which what we need to understand is that there is arrest of a person, and when there is arrest of this particular person, why the police arrest this particular person is to basically prevent certain disorder in the areas, or in order to prevent certain lawlessness, or this can also act as a deterrent factor. So an arrest by a police is basically done in order to prevent the lawlessness or to prevent the disorder, or it can act as a deterrent to other people so that they stop such mischief in the open areas. But this particular arrest, when we consider the arrest of a person, what it has to be done is it needs a proper deliberation. This cannot be used as a discretionary power at an arbitrary basis, but what it has to be done is it has to be deliberated if this arrest is suitable or not suitable. So the police have to be very sure as to whom they are arresting in this particular process. And for this, what the Supreme Court has also emphasized is that all the arrests should never be a reflexive response to an allegation of an offense or even its commission. So this is what we are discussing about the arrest of the person in the whole background. So why are we discussing this? What is the context? So when we look into the context, what happened was recently there was arrest of Swaraj India Party's chief, that is Yogendra Yadav. So Yogendra Yadav visited Tamil Nadu. So he was speaking to the farmers. So this was with respect to the Chennai-Salem 8-lane highway. So will this particular project have an effect? So he was trying to speak to the farmers to understand what are their problems. So even before having any of these allegations on him, even before he has not have any issues of corruption, any issues of dacoity, any issues of murder or thievery, what has happened in this particular case is that Mr. Yadav was arrested, and this was arrested without warrant. So what we will be considering in this particular case is what are the laws which gives the permission to the police to arrest, for which we will have to understand certain important CRPC sections. So what does it say is, first thing that we will have to understand is section 41 of the CRPC. So what does section 41 of the CRPC speaks about? One of the important things, and that is arrest without warrant. So what does this particular section speak about? So when we are considering, there are two types of arrest. One, any person who is supposed to get arrested, the police will have to provide him the warrant, and only after providing a warrant is when a particular person will be arrested. But there is also another one, and that is arresting without warrant. What do we mean by it? So this particular police, in case he has to take care another person, that is he has to arrest a particular person, he will not require an arrest warrant, and this particular procedure is provided in section 41 of the CRPC. So what will happen in this particular case is, why is that this particular person is arrested without warrant is the question that pops up. So in this particular case, what we will have to consider is three important situations. So in case he is going to further create a violence, so this particular person who is arrested without even having a warrant, in case he is going to create further violence, he is going to perpetuate violence, he is going to commit more offenses in the future, in case the police have that particular notion that he is going to increase the violence with respect to the present scenario, then the police would be able to arrest him without the warrant. And other important point is with respect to the evidence. So what do we mean by it? In case the police actually feel that he would be tampering with the evidences, he would be destroying the evidences, he'll nullify all those people who are there within this particular region, even in this particular case, the police would be able to arrest this particular person. And the third most important point is with respect to the witnesses. So any situation for that matter will also have witnesses. So in case the police actually feel that he may eliminate the witnesses or he may bribe the witnesses, so even in such particular case, what the police would be able to do is they would be able to arrest this particular person without the warrant. So the three important points where he would be able to arrest a particular person is on the basis of the violence level without evidence, that is he would be destroying the evidences, and then he may actually nullify or destroy the witnesses. That is when the police would be able to arrest a particular person without any arrest warrant. But there are certain other important sections that we need to understand. So what is the other important section that we are speaking about? And that is with respect to section 57 of the CRPC. So what does section 57 of the CRPC say? So for example, there is a particular person who is arrested. So this person who is arrested has to be notified to the magistrate within 24 hours. So this is one of the most important constitutional thing. So this is also given in article 22 of the Indian Constitution. So according to article 22 of the Indian Constitution subsection 2, what it goes on to say is that every person who is arrested and detained in the custody shall be produced before the nearest magistrate within 24 hours of such arrest, excluding the time necessary for transport. So the transport time will not be considered in this particular case, but he has to be put before the magistrate in this particular case. So this section 57 gives this particular procedure for the police, that in case you are arresting any person whosoever, in order to act as a deterrent, so this person whom you are arresting should be put behind bars, and this person should also be submitted or produced before the judicial magistrate at the earliest, which is not later than the 24 hours. That is what section 57 speaks about. And also one of the important other sections that we should be considering is section 167. So in few cases, let's say for example, the police sub-inspector or the police personnel are not able to investigate within 24 hours. In such case, what this particular police officer, not below the rank of a sub-inspector, should be able to do is he has to produce one of the copies to the judicial magistrate of the entries as to why he is not able to accomplish this particular investigation. So what it says is, even after 24 hours, in case this person has to be retained in this particular case, what he has to get is the magistrate permission. So he has to give all documentational evidences as to why he was not able to provide evidences in this particular case, and the same copies will have to be submitted to the magistrate. So these are the things that we need to consider. And after this particular program is done, what should be done is this goes up to the magistrate, and once it goes up to the magistrate, what the magistrate has to do in this particular case is, apart from whatever the police have produced, what it has to look into is the merit of this particular case. So there are certain loopholes in the system which the police can effectively make use of. So what the magistrate should look at is this particular person, that is the police, has he maintained or used the rule of law. So there are certain things that he has to follow. So we did see that section 41 has certain protocols that he has to follow. There is a particular list that he has to follow. So in case has he followed all the list and the programs and the implementational methods that has been put up in the section 41. So it will be looking behind the procedural flaws. In case there is any procedural flaws, then the magistrate will also have to look into it. So the magistrate here is duty bound not to authorize his further detention or even release this particular accused. So the police have done their job. So what the magistrate should right now do is look into the merit of this particular case, and what he can do is he should be giving this further detention or a release of this particular program. So what the most important point that we are considering is, all that the magistrate has to do is look into the merits of the case and make sure whether that particular person whom the police have arrested should be retained or should be released in this particular case. So this is what the structure is all about. But one of the most important things that the article goes on to speak is with reference to the Arnesh Kumar versus the state of Bihar. So what does this particular case say? In this particular case, the Supreme Court has clearly, in the strong words, has expressed certain dissatisfaction how the powers of the police have been misutilized and how arrest has been conducted and how the police have been conducting this particular case history. What it has gone about speaking is with respect to the police as well as the relationship with respect to the general public. So what the Supreme Court has given in this particular judgment is that this particular act of arrest that the police make is one of the important solemn function. So it is the most important function that a particular police has been doing. So this particular program or this particular action of the government, this particular action of the police have to be very seriously taken. So what it says is, when you're arresting a particular person, obviously it affects the liberty of that particular person, it affects the freedom of this particular person, and what this should be done is, this has to be taken with due care. And if you're not taking with due care, what it can do is it can create a humiliation and it can have a permanent scar on this particular person. So what it says is that you as a police officer, you should be very informed, you should be very careful, you should not be careless, because it is violating the liberty of this particular person whom you are arresting. And in case this particular person is not actually committed that mistake, what this can result is, this can bring in a lot of humiliation and this can create a permanent scar in this particular atmosphere. So what it goes on to say is, all the ideas of routine as well as casual and careless approach of the police should be completely out, and what should be made permanent is the attitude, and that is following the due process of the law. So what does this article speak about? So the article speaks about that the police have been time and again misutilizing this particular process of arrest and they are breaching certain fundamental rights. So what are the concerns that it has raised? So what this article goes about speaking is that it raised certain concerns, and when we look into the concerns, what are the concerns it has raised? One of the most important concerns it has raised is that jail actually is one of those things which should be one where it is the last moment of deterrence. But what is happening in this particular system is that jail succeeds in trumping the bail almost every time. So every person who is supposed to be arrested will have the basic idea of bails, and if this person does not get the bail, he'll be going behind the jail. So what it says is that in case there is a magistrate, he has to look into the merits of the case, and in case he feels that this person is not going to be violent or he is not going to destroy the witnesses, this person should be provided the bail option, and jail option should be the last option. But what is happening happening in this particular case? The magistrate is not even looking into this particular aspect, and he is also refusing the bail. So what is happening in this particular case is the orders are being issued mechanically without even looking at the merit aspect, and that is the most important point. So what is happening in this particular case? There is violation of the liberty, there is violation of constitutional principle of right to live with dignity. So this is what this particular article goes about speaking. So what can be the conclusion bit? So when we look into the conclusion bit, what we will realize is this particular act or this particular law, let's say for example the Indian Penal Code or the Indian Evidence Act and certain code of criminal procedure, was actually introduced by Lord Macaulay, and this was introduced in the pre-independence era. Though there was one of the important notions that this was actually important in bringing about the equality, what we need to realize is this is a colonial era imprint. So because it was bought in the colonial era, what we need to make sure is that there are certain draconian things, and these draconian laws or the draconian implementations will have to be changed accordingly, so that people do not actually face the consequences of what the police are doing, and this does not actually make sure that it is penalizing the individuals. And also what needs to be considered is the constitutional mandate that has been provided, that is liberty and right to live with dignity as expressed in Article 21, are sustained. So there are certain draconian laws, and that is informed by the Macaulay, and all these draconian laws will have to be suitably mended according to time, is what this article goes about speaking. So this is all we'll have to understand with respect to this article. So moving on, let's look into the next article. So the next article is about the Bangkok conference of the UN Framework Convention on the Climate Change. So what is the context? So when we look into the context, recently we had a 6-day meeting which was scheduled to step up the progress against the climate change. So we know for the fact that Paris Agreement was recently held in 2015, and this was supposed to be implemented, and this implementation will require certain framework, certain laws and shaping up of laws. That is why people actually met up in Bangkok, and these people wanted to make sure that there is a structure, there is a layout, there is a platform, so that they will be able to implement all that they discussed in the Paris Agreement. So what we will be discussing is, let's go back to what is the Paris Agreement speaking about. So when we look into the Paris Agreement, what we realized was that Paris Agreement came up with one of the important agreement or a thought, and the thought was to keep this particular global temperature from increasing beyond 2 degrees centigrade. So even if we cannot make sure that it is going beyond 2 degrees centigrade, what we have to restrict is up to at least 1.5 degrees centigrade. So this is what the Paris Agreement had reached into. And why was this particular notion taken up? That is because to make sure that all these islands which are actually facing a threatening situation because of the increase in the water level in the oceans are supposed to be having a problem, and in order to make sure that these problems are addressed, that is why the Paris Agreement came up with this particular program. And apart from this, what the Paris Agreement also concluded was that all the rich countries pledged to raise 100 billion a year by 2020 to help developing countries reduce their greenhouse gas emissions and aid populations to cope with extreme events of floods, droughts as well as storms. So these are the two important aspects that was there with respect to the Paris Agreement. But what are we considering in here? What we will be considering is that over a period of time, decades earlier, what we saw was all the developed countries that are currently developed made use or misutilize the Earth's resources. So when we look into certain statistics, what we will realize is before Industrial Revolution, the carbon dioxide concentration in the atmosphere was up to 280 parts per million before the Industrial Revolution, and after the Industrial Revolution, when you look into the carbon concentration, what it says is it is about 410 parts per million CO2. So what the developed countries have done with time is they have developed how? By disseminating all the important environmental factors. So they have developed by actually destroying the environment. So because they have destroyed, what they'll also have to do is they have a moral obligation. And what is the moral obligation? The moral obligation is they have developed at the cost of the environment environment, and environment is not only for the developed countries. The environment is also for all the people, the entire humanity, the entire human animal kingdom. But because they have destroyed the entire environment, it becomes a moral obligation for these countries to support the important developing countries. So these people have already developed, and because they have already developed, now they cannot put the onus on the developing countries. So what they'll have to obviously do is they'll have to make sure that they do not actually retain the status quo, but instead help all the poor countries, that is the vulnerable countries, so that even they are able to fight the cause of the climate change. And along with this, what we also need to consider is the fact of India and China. So India and China are one of the key developing countries. So both these countries have also committed to a cleaner growth of path. That is, India, which has reported an annual CO2 equivalent emissions of 2.13 billion tons in 2010 to UNFCCC 2 years ago, estimates that greenhouse emissions gas intensity of GDP has declined by 12% for the 2005-2010 period. As members committed to the Paris Agreement, China and India have the responsibility of climate leadership in the developing world and have to green their growth. So, but what the problem right now we face is that India and China are developing countries, and they are also ready to take up the responsibility. So what these developing countries should have to do is they'll have to compensate for all the things that they have destroyed with respect to the animals, and as well as with the animal kingdom, as well as with the environment. So what they need to make sure is they need to provide certain funding. Why? That is because these people have destroyed with time, and that is why they need to provide certain funding. And apart from them, they need to also provide the capacity building approach, so that these countries are able to take on the climate change. And what is most important is they should be providing the technologies that they are able to showcase, and they would be able to stop this particular climate change pattern that has been happening. Yes, China and India are ready to do it, but along with it, the developed countries should also make sure that required funding, required capacity approach, and also transfer of green technologies on the liberal terms is provided to these countries. But what are the concerns that this article goes on to speak? So when we look into these concerns, what can happen is there are number of countries with sea level rising. What can happen is there can be a large scale devastation, and when there is devastation, what this can result in is the migration. And when there is migration, obviously people will start moving into newer regions, and when they start moving into newer regions, what this can result in the clashes. So these are one of the most important things, that is migration. And apart from this, there will be loss of lives because of the large scale drought as well as large scale climate change issues. This can also be one of the resultant. So in order to make sure all these things are addressed, what we need to picture in is an important factor of funding, and this particular factor is the most important in order to make sure that all these ideas of climate change are able to be curbed, and for which we need the funding pattern. And along with it, what we also need to make sure is that USA is time and again trying to say that we are withdrawing from this particular movement, but this can actually weaken the international cooperation by not contributing to the finance as well as technology transfer. So what we should be making sure is that USA is held back with this particular program, and USA is also contributing for the funding aspect. So what we will have to realize with time is that in case we will have to make sure that there are changes to be done, what the world leaders will have to demonstrate is that they are ready to go beyond expediency and take actions required to avert the long-term catastrophe. So this is what we need to understand from this particular article. So let's look into the next article. So the next article speaks about the Cyborg Cockroach. So what is this article all about? This can be important from your GS3 perspective, and one is to do with science and technology, the other one is with respect to the disaster management. So let's try and understand what the Cyborg Cockroach all about. So what we need to understand is there are certain important things with respect to this particular article. So the most significant aspect with respect to this particular article as to why we are using this particular article and discussing is that this can be used in the rescue operations to find out if people trapped under the collapsed buildings. How is that this will be efficient? Let's try and understand that. One of the things is we need to understand what are the parts that have been used in this particular cockroach. for which we need to understand certain important equipment used. One of the important equipments that we will be considering here is the first one is the backpack. So what is this backpack? So in this particular cockroach, it is a live cockroach. On this live cockroach, it is an alive cockroach. So on this is mounted one of the important electric components, and these electric components will also have the PCBs, that is the printed circuit board, along with what is called as the microcontroller. So this is the major important program of this particular project. So this backpack is the first important point that we need to consider, and the second important point that we need to consider is the antenna. So what can happen in this particular cases, we know for the fact that antenna of an cockroach is basically used to find in case there is any disturbance. So how it happens is, it is a movement that it takes. So it hits a particular solid material. So the minute the antenna hits a particular solid material, what the cockroach senses is that there is a obstacle in front, and it changes its direction. So what happens in this particular case is, this natural antenna that is present here is replaced by what is called as a motor. So this antenna that the natural cockroach has will be replaced by an artificial antenna, and this is done by giving certain anesthesia to the cockroach. So there is replacement of the natural antenna by the artificial antenna. So this will be connected to the brains, the neurons of the particular cockroach. So what can be the resultant of this is that the particular program and an algorithm is mounted on this particular program, that is the backpack, and they'll be able to control the cockroach. So in case they're able to write an algorithm and move it to the right, so the cockroach will start moving towards the right. In case the algorithm code says move to the left, it will be able to move to the right. So with respect to this artificial antenna that is there, what can be the resultant is they'll be able to control the motion of the cockroach. How is that they're able to control? Because the natural antenna is replaced by the artificial antenna. So the second important point that we are considering is with respect to the antenna, and the third important point that we need to consider is the radio signals. So why do we need the radio signals? One of the important significant aspects that we considered was with respect to finding out in the rescue operations, in order to see if people are actually trapped when there is earthquake, or when there is any of the disasters, or there is fall of the building. We do not know, right, if the people are actually alive or not. So they would be somewhere there beneath the debris. So what will happen in this particular case is, a cockroach is controlled. So the cockroach moves into this particular debris, and it will be able to send signals. So there is radio signals that is mounted, that the antenna would be able to communicate to the environment. So the fourth that is there is the microphone. So this microphone along with the radio signals would be able to communicate and send a signal if that is a human sound, or if it is human present beneath that debris. So we have the radio signals, so we also have the microphones. What both this will coordinate amongst themselves is that the algorithm will coordinate to see in this particular debris whether the human is alive or not. So there will be certain algorithms that will be written, and these algorithms that are written would be able to deduce if the human is alive or not. And finally, what we have is the fifth part, and this is nothing but a battery. So what is there is the battery, and this battery weighs almost about 0.5 grams, so it will not be much of weightful, and even the cockroach will not have much of an impact, and this is mounted on the backpack. So this is the mechanism. And what is the most significant aspect? The most significant aspect is that they'll be able to move the cockroach, push the cockroach into the debris part, and with the help of the radio as well as the microphone, they'll be able to detect if the human is alive or not, and in case they are there beneath the debris, and if they are alive, they'll be able to take care of the rescue operations. So this can be used in the disaster management, and also this is one of the important programs that has been taken care, and so it can be part of your science and technology as well. So kindly look into the BYJU'S CNA, practice all the prelims as well as the mains question, look into the mains question, start commenting on the comment section so that we can look into and give you the relevant feedback for the same. So this is it for today. Thank you so much. All the best.